The annual summit of the Galactic Council shimmered with a level of grandeur that felt almost unreal. John stood near the sweeping archway of the Grand Assembly Hall aboard the Sovereign Crest, the flagship of the Draconian Dominion, and simply absorbed the spectacle. The gathering brought together species from every recognized sector of the galaxy, and each attendee seemed more astonishing than the last. Glass-like life forms from Epsilon Prime refracted the overhead starlight into shifting ribbons of color that danced across the polished floors. The methane inhalers from Titan's diaspora drifted inside their translucent environmental pods, gliding like serene jellyfish in an unseen current. And woven throughout the room were members of the Draconian elite, scaled beings of immense stature whose controlled, predatory grace made even their smallest movements hypnotic. John was the only human present. Humanity had just achieved faster-than-light navigation barely a quarter-year earlier, something most star nations took hundreds of years to perfect. The Council had extended an invitation not out of generosity, but curiosity. The other species wanted to see these surprising newcomers who had pierced the quantum veil with what the galactic scientific community considered reckless speed. John, a xenobiologist-turned-diplomat, was selected. Some said volunteered, others whispered he was simply unlucky. To represent Earth during its first appearance among the galaxy's most influential powers. But John wasn't intimidated. To him, this was history unfolding in real time. Across the hall, seated upon a crescent-shaped dais, the Dragon Empress radiated authority. Her scales glowed like living hammered gold, her presence commanding every glance and movement around her. Yet John's attention drifted away from the spectacle of her court. Near the panoramic observation window stood someone alone. The briefing files had mentioned her in cautious, diplomatic phrasing. Princess Elsa, the Empress's daughter and sole heir to the Draconian throne. The documents described her as processing sensory environments differently than most of her species and preferring structured, predictable surroundings. John recognized the subtle language immediately. Other worlds clearly had their own ways of expressing what humans called neurodivergence. Elsa's scales shimmered in a soft, silver-blue gradient, their glow intensified by the stars beyond the viewport. She stood motionless except for the small, repeated motions of her clawed hands, a familiar self-regulating gesture John had often seen in his sister Emma. The flow of dignitaries avoided her naturally, not out of hostility but neglect, as if she was a fixture of the room rather than a person within it. John felt something tighten in his chest. He'd seen this before. He understood it. And he had no idea that the decision he was about to make would ripple across the future of entire civilizations. But what John didn't know, what no one knew, was that approaching the isolated Dragon Princess would ignite a chain reaction that the galaxy had been unprepared for. Because sometimes, the smallest moments change everything. The tempo of the music softened into a slow, almost ceremonial melody, signaling the beginning of the Council's traditional unity dance. Delegates of every species partnered off, forming elegant spirals across the ballroom floor. Even the methane breathers joined in, using synchronized movements inside their floating pods. The display was meant to symbolize harmony, though John couldn't help noticing how selective that harmony appeared to be. Princess Elsa remained completely apart from it all. She stood at the edge of the crowd, unmoving, her silver-blue scales reflecting the dimming lights as the hall shifted into its dance mode. No one approached her. No one invited her. In fact, it seemed as though the crowd curved around her naturally, the way a river splits around a stone. A cluster of draconian nobles passed close by, laughing at some private joke. Not a single one acknowledged her presence. One brushed too near, causing her to flinch and instinctively step closer to the observation window. That movement pierced John more deeply than he expected. His younger sister Emma had done the same at gatherings back on Earth, holding herself perfectly still while the world swirled around her, overwhelmed but unseen. People didn't mean to exclude her. They simply didn't know how to include her. John exhaled slowly. He couldn't watch this continue. Without overthinking it, John began to cross the ballroom. The moment he stepped away from his corner, he felt the weight of attention shift. Conversations dipped. Curious eyes trailed him. After all, the lone human moving toward the draconian air was a sight no one had predicted. Even the Empress herself paused her discussion, her golden eyes narrowing ever so slightly. John stopped at a respectful distance, careful not to invade Elsa's space. He waited until her gaze, brilliant amber with slit-like pupils, flicked toward him. "Princess Elsa," he said quietly, keeping his tone steady and unthreatening. "I'm John, from Earth." Her expression didn't change. Her hands continued their small, repetitive motions, but she was listening. "I noticed you were standing alone," John continued gently. "I was wondering if you might consider sharing a dance with me, though I'll warn you, I'm terrible at it. I'll probably step on your toes. Or talons. I'm honestly not sure how draconian dancing works." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, just barely, the corner of Elsa's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You're the human," she said. Her voice, surprisingly musical, never quite lifted to meet his eyes. "The one who solved quantum entanglement using what my people consider primitive mathematics." John chuckled softly. "Guilty, though I like to think of our math not as primitive, just evolved differently." Elsa repeated the phrase slowly, tasting the idea. Not primitive, different. And for the first time, her hands came to a still, delicate pause. But this simple exchange was only the beginning, because the moment Elsa accepted difference over deficiency, the galaxy's most feared empire began to shift in ways no one saw coming. The silence between them stretched out, not tense, not awkward, simply spacious. John didn't rush to fill it. He let Elsa have the time she needed to process, to breathe, to understand that he wasn't expecting anything from her. At last, she spoke. "I don't like dancing," she admitted, each word carefully placed. "The music is too loud, too many bodies moving without pattern. The lights shift unpredictably." John nodded with genuine understanding. "That sounds overwhelming." He paused, then added gently, "If you'd prefer, we could just talk here. Or, if you want, we can move somewhere quieter." Elsa tilted her head, studying him with sudden, sharp focus. Her pupils narrowed slightly, not in threat, but in concentration. "You're not afraid of me," she said. Not as a question, simply an observation. "Why would I be?" John asked sincerely. She answered with cool matter-of-factness, not arrogance. "I am the daughter of the Empress, successor to a dominion with the capacity to erase your world from the star maps." John shrugged lightly. "Titles don't scare me." She blinked, clearly unaccustomed to such a response, then softer, more vulnerable. "And I am broken." The words hit John with unexpected force. His voice, when he spoke, carried no hesitation. "You're not broken," he said firmly. "You're different, like Earth mathematics, unconventional, not inferior, a variant path, not a failed one." Something in Elsa's posture shifted. The rigid line of her shoulders loosened just a fraction. Her claws relaxed, her breathing eased. It was as though no one had ever framed her existence in a way that didn't include deficiency. "The humans," Elsa murmured, her voice distant, as if quoting. "My mother says you're dangerous, not because you are powerful, but because you see patterns others miss. You solve problems through methods that should not work. You are unpredictable." John smiled. "We call it thinking outside the box." Elsa's tail flicked once behind her, not a threat gesture, but curiosity. "We call it chaos," she replied. And yet there was no judgment in her tone, only interest. Around them, the vast ballroom had gone still. Delegates pretended not to stare, but every pair of eyes was subtly drawn toward the human speaking calmly, with the princess everyone else kept at a distance. Even the Empress watched, her golden scales rippling with something difficult to interpret. Concern, surprise, calculation. John ignored them all. "So," he said softly, "no dancing. But maybe you'd walk with me. The observation deck is quiet, and I'd like to see the stars from your point of view." Elsa hesitated only a moment. Then, very deliberately, she extended her arm in the draconian gesture of acceptance. John took it gently, but as they stepped toward the exit, neither of them realized the entire power structure of the draconian empire was watching, and the consequences were already beginning to unfold. With her arm resting lightly against his, Elsa allowed John to guide her toward the sweeping arch that led out of the grand hall. Each step they took drew dozens of silent stares. Conversations faltered. Fan-like draconian ears tilted their way. Even the Empress shifted forward on her dais, the golden scales along her spine rising and falling with restrained tension. But Elsa didn't look at any of them. For the first time that night, her focus remained steady, her breathing calm, her body language relaxed, as though the noise of the galaxy dimmed simply by having a single person acknowledge her without fear or pity. As they walked, she spoke in a voice barely audible, meant only for John. "They pretend I'm not here," she said. "It makes things easier for them. If I'm invisible, they don't have to understand me." John listened but didn't interrupt. She continued. "When I was younger, they said I would grow out of it, that I would learn to tolerate the noise, the crowds, the unpredictability. When I didn't, they decided I was defective. Not sick, just inconvenient." John's chest tightened. He remembered Emma's experiences all too clearly, teachers who misunderstood her, relatives who spoke around her instead of to her, people who thought silence meant emptiness. It was never emptiness, just overwhelm, just difference. "They're wrong," John said quietly. "All of them." Elsa looked at him then, not fully, not with direct eye contact, but enough that he felt the shift. Recognition, fragile but real. "You've known someone like me," she said, not asking but concluding. "My sister," John replied. Elsa made a soft, thoughtful sound deep in her throat, an instinctive draconian vocalization that translated loosely to, "I understand." They reached the corridor leading to the observation deck. The atmosphere there was calmer, the lights dimmed, the hum of starship systems a low, steady vibration that seemed to soothe Elsa immediately. She exhaled, scales relaxing along her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For not treating me like I am other." John shook his head. "But you are other, and so am I, and so is every person in that ballroom in a different way. But being other isn't wrong, it's just real." Elsa was silent for a few long seconds before she whispered, "No one has ever said that to me." Behind them, back in the ballroom, the Empress watched their departure with eyes sharp as molten metal, seeing her daughter walk away at ease beside a human. A species the Empire barely trusted. A species her advisors insisted was unpredictable and potentially dangerous. For the first time in years, the Empress realized something unsettling. Her daughter was comfortable, and it wasn't because of her. And what the Empress felt next, fear, pride, or something far more complex, would determine the fate of not just her empire, but the fragile new bond forming between two unlikely souls. Elsa slowed her pace as they stepped onto the observation deck, the vast chamber unfolding before them in a silent sweep of starlight. The curved glass stretched from floor to ceiling, displaying the galaxy in all its impossible brilliance. Nebulae pulsed like living watercolor. Light from distant suns shimmered across Elsa's scales, giving her an almost ethereal glow. "This is my favorite place on the ship," she said quietly. "It's predictable, constant. The stars don't crowd. They don't speak unless you want them to." John smiled gently. "A place where the universe finally makes sense." Elsa nodded. "And a place where I don't feel wrong." John stepped beside her, not too close, but close enough that she felt the presence of someone who wasn't demanding anything from her. "You were never wrong," he said. "Just unseen." Elsa took in a slow breath, her claws tapping lightly against the railing in a rhythmic pattern. "My people think strength is measured by how well you fit their mold, how well you imitate their expectations. But I've never been able to be loud enough, sharp enough, social enough." "That's not weakness," John replied. "That's authenticity." The word made her pause. No one's ever wanted me to be authentic, she said. Only compliant. Outside the viewport, a comet streaked past, leaving a shimmering trail behind it, a bright arc of defiance across the dark. John pointed toward it. Look at that. It's not following anyone's path, and no one's calling it broken. Elsa considered this carefully, her amber eyes reflecting the comet's glow. You compare stars to people, she murmured. You humans really are strange. In our defense, John said lightly, the galaxy keeps telling us that. A faint, real smile curved Elsa's mouth. She looked younger in that moment, softer, more herself. Behind them, the faint sound of shifting metal echoed through the hallway, the armored step of a large draconian guard. The Empress had sent someone to observe, perhaps to interrupt, perhaps simply to understand what was happening between her daughter and this unpredictable human. But when the guard reached the threshold, he froze, not daring to disturb the princess, who for the first time in years stood without tension. Elsa didn't notice. John didn't care. You said your people solve problems in ways that shouldn't work, Elsa said thoughtfully. My mother calls that chaos. And what do you call it? John asked. Elsa looked back out at the stars. Possibility. It was a single word, but it carried the weight of a future neither of them fully understood yet. A future that had just begun. Because the moment a human saw the draconian princess not as a burden, or a political heir, or an anomaly, but as a person worth knowing, an alliance formed that no empire, no council, and no prophecy could have predicted. And across the galaxy, forces were already shifting, because nothing was more dangerous or more powerful than two people who finally felt seen.